Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons. I'm your host, Kerry Parker, and today we have episode 473 for March 23rd, 2026. So I've got a lot of stuff to cover today. We've got a new show. Before I get into that, though, I want to say a couple things. With the new war in the Middle East raging, we should expect more cyber attacks, not just during the conflict, but also after, whenever that is. We've already seen one attack on a medical equipment supplier. I'm not covering it in the news today, but it was tied to Iranian-based hackers. I'm surprised, honestly, that we haven't seen more. So I expect that we will see some sort of retaliatory attacks coming up. So we need to be expecting that. And I'll also just say that whenever there's unrest like this, and it's not just the war part, but it's causing economic turmoil as well, tends to be side effects, and it's like stirring a hornet's nest. So even outside the quote unquote theater of operations or the people directly involved in the current conflict, I think this will also trigger some cyber criminals to try to take advantage of the turmoil in other ways. So we need to be extra vigilant. What can you do about that? Well, I do have a bunch of tips at the end of the show. It's kind of a bonus tip of the week. So stay tuned for sure for that, especially if you work for a company that is in critical infrastructure or resources. All right, so we do have a new show for you today, plenty to get to. If you have an Asus router at home, there's been some attacks on those recently. Instagram has decided to drop end-to-end encryption in their chats. There was a porn addiction app called Quitter that unfortunately exposed the masturbation habits of hundreds of thousands of users. Age verification laws are popping up everywhere, and there's a lot of problems with those, and I've been kind of glossing them over lately, but Zach Whitaker had a really good article on this, so I'm going to read that. Federal surveillance technology is coming to cars as a mandatory new feature as of next year. A cyber attack on a vehicle breathalyzer company left drivers unable to use their vehicles. There was an interesting study about using large language models, or AI, to de-anonymize users online. But we also have some good news. Chat control in the EU, the more strict version of it, has been defeated at the last minute. That is amazing news. Mozilla has announced that it's going to have a free built-in, what they're calling a VPN. I've got issue with that term, but it's going to be built into Firefox coming up very soon. And Apple has come up with a new security update feature that you want to make sure you have enabled. And finally, for the tip of the week, spring has sprung. It is officially here. I know, because the pollen in North Carolina is starting to come out in full force. And by the way, if you're not familiar with this, in North Carolina, I'd never seen this until I moved here. The pollen is of a nature that it is so big and so nasty that it coats everything everywhere. It's this green-yellow dust that just collects on stuff, and it's pretty darn gross. Anyway, spring is here, so that means it's time for a spring cleaning. And this also kind of ties in with being more secure right now. So that will be our tip of the week. All right, plenty to talk about. Let's get to the news. All right, first up, if you have an Asus router, you want to definitely listen to this. But honestly, our routers are a primary target for bad actors. So this is something we all need to be paying attention to. And this is from Lifehacker. If you have an Asus router, and that, by the way, that's spelled ASUS, Asus. If you have an Asus router on your home network, it may have been targeted by a sophisticated form of malware capable of adding devices to a botnet and using them for criminal activity. Researchers at Lumen's Black Lotus Labs identified this threat, dubbed CADNAP, KADNAP, in August of 2025 and estimate more than 14,000 devices have been infected. As Ars Technica reports, CADNAP exploits unpatched vulnerabilities in connected devices, most of which are Asus routers. Infected devices are added to a proxy network that can hide malicious traffic. In this case, they are carrying traffic for a service called Doppelganger, which allows users to browse anonymously and engage in brute force attacks and targeted exploitation. CADNAP is particularly difficult to detect because its protocol conceals the IP addresses of hackers' command and control servers, allowing it to evade traditional monitoring. The design also makes it highly scalable and resistant to takedown. An estimated 60% of the affected devices are located in the US. Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Russia account for another 5% each, with the remainder spread across numerous other countries around the world. Okay, now this next part gets technical, and so if this is over your head, that's expected. But I'll read it anyway. It says, if you think your router may be infected with Cadnap, compare the IP address and file hash in your device log with those on Black Lotus Labs indicators of compromise. And that's a link that you can go check out that lists these IP addresses. You'll need to do a factory reset, as rebooting will only run a shell script, not remove the malware. You can also run IP Check, a tool from threat monitoring firm Gray Noise that can help determine if your router is potentially being used for malicious purposes, the Cadnap botnet or otherwise. If your IP is flagged as suspicious, you'll be able to see recent scanning activity to investigate further. When it comes to network security, prevention is good protection. Update your network name and administrative password from your router's defaults, which are easy to discover. Consider disabling remote access controls, which prevents threat actors from changing settings without your knowledge, and log out of your admin account when it's not in use. Finally, keep your router's firmware up to date to ensure vulnerabilities are patched quickly. Okay, first of all, this IP check tool is really great. I've talked about it before. It's very simple. It's just a website you go to from any device in your house. And if you go there on the webpage and it's a green banner at the top, you're probably okay. What this thing is doing is they're doing threat scanning of devices on the internet and looking for bad activity or signatures of known malware activity coming from all the IP addresses on the planet, including yours, hopefully. So if it has noticed suspicious activity coming from your IP address, it will have noted that, and it will show you that on this web page. Now, obviously, this is not determinative. Just because you have a green light doesn't mean you're not infected, but it does mean that they have not been able to recognize any bad activity coming from your IP address. It's still a great check to make. Honestly, I would bookmark this page. In fact, if you really want to make sure you're checking this often, you can set your browser's default page to be this page, not a search engine page, not a blank page, but this page. And that way, every time you open up a new tab, you'll be running this check. But otherwise, I would set a reminder for yourself, and I would bookmark and check this page like once a month, at least. And so what do you do if it's not green? Well, I think they will actually give you some tips if that ever happens. But you should also periodically reboot your home router. A lot of bad guys target home routers to try to take them over, and you wouldn't notice it. It might be running a little bit slow, but otherwise you wouldn't notice that it was compromised. But if it's compromised, then potentially all the devices in your home could be attacked. And it can be used to proxy malicious traffic from the bad guys out to other sites. So often rebooting your router is enough to get rid of malware. Most of the malware cannot survive a restart on appliance type devices like IoT devices and your router. So just periodically restarting your router can kind of keep it clean. But in this case, it sounds like this malware has found a way to persist on your router even over a reboot. So if you think you're infected by this particular thing, you're going to actually need to do a hard reset on your router, go back to factory defaults, which will probably reset the password and your settings and everything. So that will be a pain. But if you really think your router has been compromised and a reboot doesn't fix it, in this case, that sounds like that's the case, then you would actually have to do a hard reset on your router. And so you'll have to look up the information on your router to figure out how to do that. And before you do it, make sure you jot down any particular settings you had that you want to be able to put back after it's done the reset. All right, next up, this is actually from Proton's blog. They've been putting out a lot of blogs lately, usually with some good topics. Of course, it always comes down to the end of, and Proton can solve all your problems. So I usually skip that part. But this is about Instagram, which of course is owned by Meta, aka Facebook. And they've decided to drop end-to-end encrypted messaging on Instagram as of May. All right, let me read this article and then I'll give you my take. Instagram appears to be stepping back from end-to-end encrypted messaging, a surprising move after years of Meta, its parent company, promoting strong encryption as the future of private communications. A notice on Instagram's help pages now says that end-to-end encrypted messaging on Instagram will no longer be supported after May 8th, 2026. The page instructs affected users, which is anybody who uses Instagram, I guess, to download any chat messages or shared media they want to keep before that date. End-to-end encryption is designed to keep messages private by ensuring only the devices involved in a conversation can read them, not the platform hosting the chat. In other words, Facebook. Because of this, Meta would not be able to retroactively read past encrypted conversations. Instagram has not publicly explained why encrypted chats must be downloaded before the deadline or what will happen to those conversations after May 8th, but the notice suggests that the end-to-end encrypted chat system may be retired. This update is quite notable because Meta has spent years promoting end-to-end encryption as a key part of its messaging strategy. In 2019, Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg announced a plan to shift the company's messaging platforms toward private, encrypted communication, including Instagram, Messenger, and WhatsApp. At the time, Zuckerberg wrote that people increasingly wanted digital spaces where conversations were private and secure. In the years that followed, Meta expanded end-to-end encryption across its messaging products. WhatsApp already used it by default, and the company began rolling out end-to-end encrypted chats on Messenger and Instagram as part of its broader push toward private messaging. Instagram's apparent shift comes as end-to-end encrypted messaging is once again at the center of policy debates on online safety. In March 2026, the BBC reported that TikTok does not plan to introduce end-to-end encryption for direct messages, arguing the technology could make it harder for safety teams and law enforcement to investigate harmful activity. End-to-end encryption ensures that only the sender and recipient of a message can read its contents, not the platform hosting the services, hackers, or governments. Security experts widely consider it the strongest form of encryption for private digital communications. So yeah, encryption is good, especially end-to-end encryption. We need this everywhere. And it's really puzzling as to why Meta, after going to the trouble of having it, is going to take it away. But there was a really weird comment in The Verge that I'm going to read. It says, The Verge reached out to some Meta spokesperson, Dina somebody. And Dina said that the platform is discontinuing the feature because very few people were using end-to-end encryption in their direct messages. All right, so that's a really dumb reason. First of all, it should just be on by default. You shouldn't have to enable it. That's the problem. It's like saying very few people enabled the built-in firewall, so we're going to remove it. Well, just turn it on by default. How many people even know it's there or why it's valuable? It is valuable intrinsically. Just enable it for everybody. Or maybe saying like, very few people use seatbelts, so they're expensive. We're going to pull them back out of vehicles. Of course, it's mandatory by law, which honestly, policy is a good thing here too. We need to enforce using encryption as much as possible. And that should be a policy decision as well. So anyway, I don't understand why they're doing this, but heads up, Instagram direct messages are no longer going to have the ability to be end-to-end encrypted as of May. So maybe don't use that. Use Signal. All right, next up, this one is really disturbing. It's from 404 Media. And it's about a porn addiction app, meaning an app that is supposed to help you become not addicted to porn, called Quitter, Quittr. And it's a bit long, but there's a lot of interesting backstory here because they were hacked. And some very, very private information was leaked on hundreds of thousands of its users. Okay, here we go. Quitter, an app that promises to help men stop watching pornography, leaked intimate data on hundreds of thousands of its users, including their masturbation habits, and lied about its security issues, 404 can now reveal. This is an amazing story. I first reported, and I believe this is Joseph Cox, who I've interviewed, I first reported about Quitter exposing user data in January, but was unable to name Quitter in the story because its creators, Alex Slater and Connor McLaren, did not fix its security issues despite multiple requests and an offer from an independent researcher to help them fix the problem. Naming the app while hackers were still able to easily steal Quitter's user data would have endangered their privacy and put them at risk of extortion from hackers, which is very common today. Some of the data exposed include the user's age, how often they masturbate, and how viewing pornography makes them feel. According to the data, many of them are minors. Quitter is operated by Slater and McLaren, members of the so-called App Mafia, a group of men in their early 20s who claim to have made millions of dollars on mobile app development. Slater and McLaren were recently the subjects of a long New York Magazine profile which detailed the opulent lifestyle the success of Quitter has afforded them, including driving exotic supercars and living in a Miami mansion. Slater shares videos about his lifestyle on his personal YouTube channel as well. Slater claims Quitter has been downloaded more than 1.5 million times and makes $500,000 a month. But despite these incredible numbers, the developers were somehow unable or unwilling to fix a major security flaw in the app for months. I first learned about the Quitter vulnerability from an independent researcher who scanned the Google Play Store and Apple App Store for a common misconfiguration in apps that use Google Firebase, an app development platform. The researcher tested hundreds of the top apps on both stores after we published a story about the T app, that's TEA, suffering a devastating hack due to the same issue. The researcher found dozens of apps had the same problem, including Quitter, but did not name Quitter in his public disclosure because the highly sensitive personal data could put users at risk. Yeah, no kidding. The researcher said he contacted Slater directly on September 10th of 2025 to tell him about the Quitter vulnerability. And this is a quote from Slater, one of the founders, what he responded to that. And it says, quote, "It's my fault fully. I should have been on top of this. The way you pulled the database was super creative. So props to that. But again, this is serious data and is not good at all. Working on fixing right now. Will be fixed in the next hour," unquote. But Slater and McLaren did not fix the issue for months. I called him in January, told him about some of the sensitive user data I had seen, and asked him why he had not fixed the vulnerability even after he told the researcher he would. And this is another quote from Slater who said, quote, "There is no sensitive information exposed. That's just not true. These users are not in my database, so I just don't give this guy attention. I just think it's a bit of a joke. After checking with my engineers, I saw this was never an issue," unquote. When I asked Slater why he previously thanked the researcher for responsibly disclosing the misconfiguration and said he would rush to fix it, he wished me a good day and hung up. After the call, I created an account on the app, which the researcher was able to see appear in the misconfigured Google Firebase, confirming that user information was still exposed. I called, texted, and emailed Slater and any email associated with Quitter I found several times after that call, but never heard back. After a week of trying to contact Quitter and repeatedly checking that the app was still vulnerable, 404 Media decided to publish the story without naming the app in order to protect its users while still highlighting an important security issue in a popular app. Overall, the researcher said he could access the information of more than 600,000 users of the porn coding app, 100,000 of which were identified as minors. The app also invites users to write confessions about their habits. One of these read, quote, "I just can't do this, man. I honestly don't know what to do no more. Such a loser. I need serious help," unquote. And now this is a quote from McLaren from his New York Magazine article. It says, quote, "We were like, how can we build an app to make money? Then as I realized how large the issue was, that's when it became more of a passion project. Like, how can we help men actually become men again," unquote. Wow, there's a lot to unpack there. Anyway, after the New York Magazine profile was published, the researcher checked Quitter again and saw that it fixed its misconfiguration database, which is why we're naming the app now. Okay, so obviously from this article, we just need to take away the fact that you can't trust these companies, these apps. And it's sad because I'm not talking about this app in particular, but there are a lot of apps out there, like maybe period tracking apps, that are very useful, but require you to divulge very personal information. And I hate to say it, but there's a lot of developers out there like this one that are just totally in it for the money, don't care about security at all. It's an afterthought if it's a thought at all. But even if they did their best, it's hard to get this right. And sometimes the failure doesn't have to be you. Sometimes it's a failure with your backup provider or your data storage company or the servers that you run on. So we're just not there yet, folks. I would just encourage you to think very carefully about any information you give to any app or honestly any website, anything that's stored online or anything you talk to a chatbot about. That information we have not been able to sufficiently secure yet. We have not figured out how to make sure that information is never stolen. End-to-end encryption is great when we can do it, but a lot of these apps require that information to be processed at the server, and so it can't be truly end-to-end encrypted. And as soon as that's the case, as soon as the server has some access to your data, then it could be leaked. All right, next up, this is from Zach Whitaker, who does some great work. And this is a bit of a long article, I apologize, but again, this is important. This is probably the longest article we're going to cover today. But it's about age verification. And we've had lots of stories recently about laws going into effect, but this one actually talks a lot about why just the whole notion of age verification has problems. So I wanted to stop and focus on that for a little bit. And so this was a good article. So here we go. This is from Zach Whitaker's This Week in Security. Picture this. You open your favorite app or website, but you're suddenly blocked. On your screen, it says that before you're allowed in, you must verify your age by taking a photo of your face or uploading a copy of your government-issued ID. If you don't, or can't, you will be locked out of your account until you prove that you are your country's legal age. This would be a nightmare for, well, anyone, and a prohibitive quid pro quo for many, in some cases long after opening an account and trusting an online provider with your information. But thanks to a wave of age verification laws passed by governments around the world, this is now an increasingly common and inescapable scenario for hundreds of millions of people. Under these new laws, adults are required to show that they are of legal age by uploading copies of their driver's license or passport before they can access certain apps, websites, and online communities as determined by law. This information is often collected by privately held companies, which store and cross-check large amounts of people's personal information to determine their ability to access the wider web. In rolling out these laws, governments are effectively walling off large swaths of the open and decentralized internet while sleepwalking the rest of us into a security and privacy disaster. Now, hundreds of security and privacy academics are sounding the alarm, and that's a link, by the way, and I'll put that link probably specifically in the show notes, in response to these invasive online checks, saying age verification laws carry significant risks that threaten the internet as we know it. By the way, that's not hyperbole, that is true. Age verification laws have spread around the world over the past year or so under the ostensible aim of trying to keep children safe online, such as from social media and adult content. The United Kingdom and Australia began requiring age checks for certain social media sites, messaging apps, and other online communities last year. Today, there are dozens of countries moving to enact some form of age verification laws. At least half of all U.S. states have some form of age checks in place, and Europe is also gearing up for its own age verification legislation. And by the way, that paragraph was packed with links, so if you want to read into that and find out more, go to this article and you can. Age verification laws are a lazy way for politicians and governments to appear as if they are tackling online child safety, but without any forethought to the future consequences of amassing vast banks of personal information for verifying people's identities. Rather than holding ultra-wealthy tech and social media giants accountable for their actions, cowardly and toothless governments are instead requiring ordinary people to shoulder the legal burden. These are the same tech companies that won't pay any tax, all the while governments let them get away with it. While we can all agree that we want kids to be safer online, this is not a zero-sum game where an entire population has to suffer as a trade-off. As journalist Taylor Lorenz writes in The Guardian, age verification laws, quote, could transform the internet from a space of free expression to a fully surveilled digital panopticon where every action you take online is tied to your government ID, unquote. In their open letter, the coalition of academics say age verification laws can do more harm than good if implemented without careful consideration of the technical hazards and societal impact. The academics argue, among other things, that age verification checks can diminish a person's privacy by storing their personal information and what content they access in potentially insecure ways, exposing the data to breaches and government snooping. They add that age checks increase the risks of inequality and discrimination against people who don't have identity documents to show, such as the elderly and undocumented migrants. And age checks allow authoritarian governments to abuse and exploit these systems to censor access to the internet. According to the academics, many age verification systems are, as designed today, create a single point of failure by storing huge amounts of personal and identifiable information in central databases. These data stores become rich targets for hackers, malicious insiders, and law enforcement agencies demanding access at a moment's notice. The academics add that without strict data protection or security and privacy regulations, many companies will default to the easier and centralized ways of storing data in order to comply with age verification laws rather than investing in technologies that fully decouples a person's identity from a list of apps or websites that they access. And this is a quote from the academics here that says, quote, "If that central authority is breached, subpoenaed, or acts maliciously, the supposedly private system is completely exposed, transforming a vague technical requirement into a systemic privacy disaster," unquote. These are not hypotheticals. In October of 2025, Discord reported a data breach that allowed hackers to steal around 70,000 identity documents of users who had contacted its customer support to appeal their age check determination. There are inherent risks in collecting this kind of sensitive data to begin with. Gated community apps like T and T on Her, which we've talked about both those on this show before, and we just talked about them earlier today, which only allowed access to users who uploaded their identity documents, both experienced security spills involving thousands of people's papers. And according to 404 Media, AU10Tix, an online age verification service used by TikTok, Uber, and X, exposed a set of internal administrative credentials online for a year, potentially allowing hackers to access users' sensitive documents. The academics also warn of the dangers of granting companies and governments enormous power over what information is accessible to people on the internet. Governments change, as do laws. What may be the norm one day can be ripped up by the next. In the wrong hands, the academics say, age verification systems could allow authoritarian governments to censor information and prevent users from accessing services. Age verification laws are also a slippery slope of subjective harms that are unlikely to stop at adult-appropriate websites and apps. Some U.S. states have defined their laws broadly enough that they risk ring-fencing LGBTQ+ communities and content about reproductive health. Once age verification laws are enacted, it's easier for lawmakers and governments to justify further changes to these laws. After the UK age verification laws took effect in 2025, the use of VPNs among British users skyrocketed. VPNs allow users to skirt age checks by appearing as if they're in another country whose laws do not require this information. This prompted the UK government to double down on its legislation by exploring whether to expand age checks to cover VPNs, a move that would have untold consequences and disruption for regular businesses. There is some good news amid all of this. Public disgust and revulsion to age checks and the mass collection of people's private papers are having an effect. Discord said it would postpone its age verification rollout after facing considerable backlash from its users, which, fair, since it's a reputational matter for these companies too. None of these companies probably want to be tarnished as creepy or gross, and yet major popular consumer services have now found themselves on the front lines of collecting people's sensitive documents from angry and aggrieved users. Age checks are ultimately a legislative problem. Make your voice heard. Call and email your lawmakers. Tell them, or rather their staff answering the phones and juggling inboxes, that you don't want this. Tweet, skeet, and post at them online. Send them this story or anything I've linked to here, and make it clear that this is a voting issue for you. Meanwhile, critics of age verification laws like Amnesty International say governments should instead pass legislation that aims to protect all users of the internet. This means working on passing stronger data protection laws and safeguards that hold tech companies accountable for the harms they've created through their relentless pursuit of user engagement and exploitation of people's personal data. The Electronic Frontier Foundation has a guide, and that's a link, on what to expect when you face an age check. Anecdotally, some people on social media sites like Reddit say that if you are presented with an age verification prompt, you can try taking a photo of your government-issued ID and using your phone's editing tools to scrub your sensitive information, such as your driver's license or passport numbers and your home address, while leaving your date of birth visible, and then submitting it. Some of these age verifications will accept partially redacted documents. Again, if you're a security researcher, consider looking into the architecture of these age verification platforms to understand how and where they store people's data. As these age-checking platforms become more mainstream, finding the security flaws or weaknesses, reporting them so they can be fixed, and publicly disclosing them will help to raise awareness to the risks and harms that come from badly implemented age verification systems. The greater the visibility into these gargantuan data hoarders, the better for the public's understanding at large. Okay, so Zach brings up a lot of great points in there and didn't even cover all of them, to be honest. But these age verification laws, while trying to protect children, mean that everyone, not just children, need to prove their age. So it's not like, oh, I'm an adult, this doesn't affect me. Yeah, it affects you because you have to prove you're an adult. And we've seen multiple cases just recently of sites where, due to these age verification things or identity verification requirements, people who uploaded these government documents have them stolen. And that's bad. Like that, a lot of that information could be used for identity theft, for example, or, other nefarious purposes. And it also makes anonymity online impossible. And we need that capability. So pay attention to this, get involved, talk to your local representatives and, local, state, and federal, and make your opinions heard. We are rushing headlong into this because some countries have done it. A lot of people are jumping on the bandwagon and try to ride their coattails. It's really rolling out very quickly, and it's going to be a very big problem. We need to find some other way to solve this problem. Okay, this next one blew my mind, and I'm surprised that it snuck up on me. I had not seen this until now. This is crazy. This is from Gadget Review. Your next car purchase comes with an unwelcome passenger, a federal mandate requiring surveillance technology that monitors your every blink, glance, and head nod. Thanks to Section 24220 of the 2021 Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, NHTSA, which for those of you unfamiliar is the National Highway Transportation Safety Administration, must finalize rules forcing all new passenger vehicles, all, to include, quote, advanced impaired driving prevention technology, unquote, essentially turning your dashboard into a judgment-free zone that's anything but judgment-free. Infrared cameras and sensors create a constant biometric assessment of driver alertness and sobriety. The tech involves infrared cameras mounted on steering columns or A-pillars, tracking eye movement, pupil dilation, and drowsiness patterns. Unlike the breathalyzer ignition interlocks from DUI convictions, which we're going to talk about in the next story, by the way, these systems operate passively, no blowing required. Your car simply watches and decides whether you're fit to drive. If the AI, which should already send chills up your spine, if the AI determines you're impaired, which would be a blood alcohol level of greater than 0.08% or showing fatigue, it can prevent ignition startup or limit vehicle speed. Think Minority Report, but for your morning commute. The surveillance rollout targets late 2026 to 2027 for all new passenger vehicles. While NHTSA's final rule faced delays beyond the November 2024 deadline, automakers still get 2 to 3 years for full implementation once regulations are finalized. Your current vehicle stays surveillance-free, but shopping for a 2027 model means accepting this digital co-pilot. The timing coincides with broader automotive software integration, making these systems potentially updatable through over-the-air patches, expanding monitoring capabilities post-purchase. Data collection worries combined with a $100 to $500 per vehicle cost increase passed to consumers. The privacy implications extend beyond federal oversight. While the law doesn't mandate external data sharing, manufacturers could potentially upload biometric data to corporate servers, raising concerns about sharing with insurance companies to adjust your premiums based on driving behaviors. The technology adds significant costs. Estimates range from $100 to $500 per vehicle that automakers will inevitably pass to consumers already struggling with inflated car prices. Automakers oppose the mandate, citing technical readiness concerns and sales impact fears. Car manufacturers argue that the technology remains unreliable, which is almost surely true, warning of false positives that could strand drivers. They're concerned about customer backlash and potential sales declines as buyers seek older, unmonitored vehicles. The federal government promises this surveillance saves 9,000 to 10,000 lives annually. Whether that justifies your car becoming a mobile panopticon depends on how much vehicle autonomy you're willing to trade for theoretical safety gains. Your driving privacy expires with your current car's lifespan. Yeah, let that sink in. I don't know how I hadn't heard about this till now, but oh my God. Okay, so honestly, some cars already have this. I think Teslas already do this. It's got inward-facing cameras that if you're, for instance, if you're in the self-driving mode where your hands aren't on the wheel, it still wants you to be paying attention. If you're looking down at your phone, for example, or if your eyes are closed, it knows that and tells you to wake up and pay attention. So some of this is already out there, but now this is going to be mandatory on all vehicles. And again, what it's doing is it's looking with some sort of AI to try to determine if you're sleepy, if you're drunk, or otherwise impaired. And if so, we'll either not let your car start at all or reduce your speed, probably hoping that you're going to get off the road or whatever. But how good are these AI algorithms? I can tell you right now, they're not going to be good. And for what about people who have disabilities? There's going to be a lot of false positives here. And then, if these companies are forced to put this stuff into cars, they're just going to take all this data and find some way to monetize it in some other ways. This is going to be a privacy nightmare. But with that in mind, let me get to my next story. So this one's from TechCrunch, and it's about those breathalyzers built into vehicles that I was just talking about. A cyber attack on a U.S. vehicle breathalyzer company has left drivers across the United States stranded and unable to start their vehicles. The company, Intoxalock, says on its website that it is, quote, currently experiencing downtime, unquote, after a cyber attack on March 14th. Intoxalock sells breathalyzer devices that fit into vehicle ignition switches and is used by people who are required to provide a negative alcohol breath sample to start their car. Intoxalock spokesperson Rachel Larson confirmed to TechCrunch that the company had been hit by a cyber attack. Larson said the company took steps to, quote, temporarily pause some of our systems as a precautionary measure, unquote. These breathalyzer devices need to be calibrated every few months or so, but the cyber attack has left Intoxalock unable to perform these calibrations. The company said customers whose devices require calibration may experience delays starting their vehicle. Drivers posting on Reddit said that cars are unable to start if they miss calibration, effectively locking drivers out of their vehicles. According to local news reports across Maine, drivers are experiencing lockouts and some have been unable to start their vehicles. One auto shop in Middleborough told WCBV5 in Boston that it had cars parked in its lot all week due to the cyber attack. News reports from across the United States show drivers are affected from New York to Minnesota, and the drivers have been unable to drive because their vehicle-based breathalyzers cannot be immediately calibrated. Intoxalock would not say what kind of cyber attack it was experiencing, such as ransomware or if there was a data breach, or whether it had received any communication from the hackers, including any ransom demands. The company's technology is used in 46 states, its website says, and it claims to provide services to 150,000 drivers every year. Intoxalock did not provide an estimated timeline for its recovery. So if you're not aware of these things, it's another case of trying to solve thorny problems by throwing technology at it. And so if you have been convicted of a DUI, maybe multiple DUIs, driving under the influence or driving while intoxicated, you may be required by a court to install this device in your ignition system of your vehicle such that before it will even turn on, you have to blow into this thing, basically do a breathalyzer test and pass it before your car is allowed to turn on to keep you from driving while drunk. Now, I would have to hope that it's also somehow tied to sensors in your driver's seat, because otherwise you could just have someone else blow in your car for you, start the car, and then you could go, right? I mean, this is the problem with technological solutions to these problems. But here's the other problem. These devices need to be calibrated every so often, apparently. And if they are not calibrated, they won't work at all. And they're probably connected to the internet and check in with the mothership. And maybe there's some sort of calibration routine that you go through. But if that connection is down, if that service is down, if the company that runs that central service is unavailable for whatever reason, all of a sudden your car is dead. And even if you are stone cold sober, you can't operate your own vehicle due to this glitch. So this is a danger of making our devices dependent on central services. Also connecting everything to the internet. Now your car is an IoT device, and so now it's subject to all those kind of problems. So we've got to think these things through. Your vehicle should work whether or not it can talk to the internet, and should not be dependent on these central things that can glitch or be hacked or whatever. We've got to do better. Okay, next one's a very interesting study about using AI, large language models in particular, to de-anonymize people online. And it's from Simon Lerman, someone I wasn't aware of. But anyway, this is an interesting study. And again, it's a little bit long, but hang with me here. While it had been known that individuals can be uniquely identified by surprisingly few attributes, this is often practically limited. Data is often only available in unstructured form, and de-anonymization used to require human investigators to search and reason based on clues. We show that from a handful of comments, LLMs can infer where you live, what you do, and your interests, then search for you on the web. In our new research, we show that this is not only possible, but increasingly practical. Among the near-term effects of AI, different forms of AI surveillance pose some of the most concrete harms. It is already known that LLMs can infer personal attributes about authors and use that to create biographical profiles of individuals. Such profiles can be misused straightforwardly with spear phishing or many other forms of monetizing exploits. Using AI for massively scalable people search is harmful by itself by undermining many privacy assumptions. Beyond shining a light on this growing harmful use of AI, we explore options for how individuals can protect themselves and what social platforms and AI labs can do in response. We acknowledge that by publishing our results and approximate methods, we carry some risk of accelerating misuse developments. Nevertheless, we believe that publishing is the right decision. So then it lists a couple different ways that it did what it did. First was cross-platform matching. The idea of our cross-platform benchmark is to take two accounts on different platforms for which we know they belong together, and then remove any directly identifiable features from one of the accounts. The task is then to put the accounts of the same person back together. Concretely, we take non-anonymous Hacker News accounts, and that's a website, Hacker News, that link to their LinkedIn. We then anonymize the Hacker News accounts, removing all directly identifying information. Then we let LLMs match the anonymized account to the true person. We find that we can re-identify most accounts with high precision when we are combining search and reasoning. We use embeddings-based research to find the 100 most promising candidates and then reason to collect and verify the most promising candidate. So method 2 is this matching split accounts. As another approach to benchmarking de-anonymization, we artificially split up a single account into two accounts, and then test if we were able to link these split accounts back together. On Reddit, we split user histories into before and after, then test whether LLMs can link them back together. Alternatively, we split Reddit accounts by community, dividing their activity according to the subreddits they participate in. In both cases, LLM embeddings combined with reasoning significantly outperform Netflix prize-style baselines that match based on subreddit activity patterns and metadata. So let me stop for a second. That Netflix prize-style case is a link, which you should check out if you're interested. And this goes back to a story where Netflix anonymized all of its user data, quote unquote, for how people liked or disliked movies. You know, if you remember back in the day, Netflix had a thumbs up, thumbs down. And as you went through all the movies you've seen and gave it a thumbs up or a thumbs down, it would start recommending stuff based on your preferences. So Netflix had this prize where they said, if you can improve our algorithm, I think it was by 5%, we will pay you, I don't know, $1 million something. And so they made all of this user data publicly available so that people could try to improve their algorithm, and they took people's names off of them. But it turns out that there was still enough information left in the user data to infer who those people were in a lot of cases. That's what they're referring to there. In other words, to re-identify these supposedly anonymized data sets. Okay. Back to the article. As candidate pools grow to tens of thousands, LLM-based attacks degrade gracefully at a high precision. This implies that with sufficient compute, these methods would already scale to entire platforms. With future models, we can expect that performance will improve while the cost will only go down. Okay, so what now? First of all, what can platforms do? The most effective short-term mitigation is restricting data access. Shocking. Enforcing rate limits on API access to user data, detecting automated scraping, and restricting bulk data exports all raise the cost of large-scale attacks. Platforms should assume that pseudonymous users can be linked across accounts and to real identities, and this should inform their data access policies. All right, what about LLM providers? What can they do? Refusal guardrails and usage monitoring can help, but both have significant limitations. Our de-anonymization framework splits an attack into seemingly benign tasks, summarizing profiles, computing embeddings, ranking candidates, that individually look like normal usage, making misuse hard to detect. Refusals can be bypassed through task decomposition. And none of these mitigations apply to open source models, where safety guardrails can be removed and there is no usage monitoring at all. In some tested scenarios, LLM agents did refuse to help us, but this could be avoided with small prompt changes. This mirrors inherent issues with preventing AI misuse. Each step of misuse can locally be identical and very similar to valid use cases. All right, so finally, what should you do if you're using pseudonymous online accounts? Individuals may adopt a stronger security mindset regarding privacy. Each piece of specific information you share, your city, your job, a conference you attended, a niche hobby, narrows down who you could be. The combination of all these kind of little tidbits is often a unique fingerprint. Ask yourself, could a team of smart investigators figure out who you are from your posts? If yes, LLM agents can likely do the same, and the cost of doing so is only going down. So what this is basically saying is, if you have an online account that you have a handle, some super cool guy 23 or whatever, and you don't want anybody to know that super cool guy 23 is really John Smith, then you're going to need to start being a lot more clever. And sadly, if you've been on that service for a long time and all that history is available, now you've got tons of data for things like AI tools to look through to try to figure out, oh, yeah, I recognize that. If I look at all of Cool Guy 23's posts over the last 10 years, or probably even just 2 years, I can see that somewhere he mentioned going to work at some place and, oh, yeah, I went to this park today, or, oh, I really like watching this movie because I've got this background or whatever, without ever saying their name or their address or very tightly identifiable information. Taken in total, looking through all that data, you can narrow down who that person could be, especially if you do have other things like a LinkedIn account or something, or a Facebook account that is tied to your actual name, where they could cross-check and say, all right, well, John Smith over on Facebook said similar things. And in fact, there's a post where you went to the same movie. You said you went to the same movie on this day as on the pseudonymous account for Cool Guy 23. So that's probably John Smith. And the point this article is making is that humans could do this, right? If you're trying to catch a criminal and so you're sorting through all this information, trying to identify somebody, they've posted some really crazy, awful things on a pseudonymous account somewhere, and they want to find out who that person is because they're pretty sure they're the killer or the bad guy or whatever. A person could do that. It would take a lot of time. What this guy is saying is it doesn't take a person anymore. AI, large language models, can be pointed at all the same information and do this very quickly and at scale. So it's not just about going after one person. It's about identifying all the people. So what do I recommend at this point? Well, be careful what you post online. Don't make it public if you can help it. Things like Facebook, you don't have to make those posts public. You can make them only visible to your friends or even to a subset of your friends. And in some cases, you can even go back and I think maybe retroactively do that. Though I think if you've ever made it public, I think most sites say you can't take that back. But at least going forward, you can change it. And so be very careful what you post, especially if you've got both pseudonymous accounts and identified accounts like LinkedIn or Facebook, where you might be posting similar things, or people might be able to look at those two different accounts and say, oh, those are the same person, and therefore identify you. So I'm just going to say, as I read this article, I couldn't stop but think okay, what would I do? If I really wanted to have a pseudonymous account that I never wanted to be able to link it back to me, what would I do? Well, first of all, I would never, ever access that account except through a VPN. And I would probably choose my VPN exit server to be anywhere else besides where I am and make it consistent. So it appears to be, it's no secret, I'm in North Carolina. So I might always pick a California exit node for my VPN whenever I post to that service. I would also probably choose my times of posting. Some of the things that they look at when you post online to try to identify you is figure out when you do all your posting, because there are patterns there. Maybe it's lunchtime, maybe it's before work, maybe it's after work, maybe it's always on, maybe people post on weekends and a lot at certain times of day that is kind of predictable based on where you live. If people tend to post a lot in the mornings and you post a lot at 8 a.m. Eastern time, well, then maybe you are in the Eastern time zone. So I would pick maybe 1 or 2 times a day and only post during those times a day and pick times that are weird for my area. And maybe I could automate that so I don't actually have to stay up till 3 in the morning to post. But then I thought, well, why not use an LLM to my advantage? Why not use AI for me? And so everything I want to post, instead of me posting exactly the way I would phrase it and use it with terms and idioms and other kind of phrases that might identify me, run it through an LLM and specifically tell that LLM, I want you to basically translate this. Here's what I want to say. I want you to rephrase this in a way that a 23-year-old girl from Minneapolis, how they would say the exact same thing with, whatever pop culture and other kind of phrases would make sense for that identity. And maybe even go so far as to say, and pretend that English is my second language. Maybe Spanish is my first language. Rephrase what I just said with that persona and then post that. Anyway, I that's just how my brain functions, I guess. I couldn't help but think that way. All right, let's keep moving. So let's wrap up with some good stories here. This one's from Cyber Insider, and it's a very welcome development in the EU's chat control saga. The European Parliament has voted to curb untargeted mass scanning of private communications in the EU, signaling a major shift in the ongoing debate over chat control legislation. Lawmakers backed amendments that would restrict automated scanning of private messages to cases involving users or groups specifically suspected of child sexual abuse and authorized by a judicial authority. The decision came after a plenary vote on March 11th of 2026 as part of discussions on extending the temporary exemption to EU privacy rules that currently allows online service providers to voluntarily detect and report child sexual abuse material, or CSAM. The exemption, originally set to expire in early April 2026, was extended by the members of the European Parliament, or MEPs, until August 3rd of 2027, so only another year and a half, to allow more time for negotiations on a permanent regulatory framework. At the same time, lawmakers adopted amendments tightening how such detection measures can be used. One of the key provisions, Amendment 5, introduced by Pirate Party MEP Marketa Grigorova, and by the way, Pirate Party is a legit name of a party, which is fantastic. Anyway, of the Greens EFA group, requires any scanning of private communications to be strictly targeted. Under the amendment, providers could only scan messages belonging to users or groups identified by a competent judicial authority as being reasonably suspected of involvement in child sexual abuse offenses. The move effectively rejects proposals for broad, untargeted scanning of private chats, an approach that had been advocated by some EU governments during the negotiations over the proposed child sexual abuse regulation, often referred to as chat control. Cryptography experts warned that the law would threaten all private communications, while Signal president Meredith Whittaker warned that the company would exit the European Union if the law mandating client-side scanning were ever adopted. Although countries like Germany and the Netherlands previously took a clear stance against the proposal, other EU member states continue to push for it under lighter but still dangerous forms. Digital rights advocates welcomed the decision as a major setback for proposals to blanket scan private communications. Patrick Breyer, a digital rights campaigner and former Pirate Party MEP who long opposed chat control, described the vote as a sensational victory for privacy protections in Europe. According to Breyer, evidence cited in EU Commission evaluations suggested that large-scale automated scanning generates substantial volumes of false positives. Data referenced by critics indicates that roughly half of reported chats can be non-criminal or misidentified, potentially diverting law enforcement resources away from targeted investigations into actual abuse networks. Another concern raised by critics is the heavy reliance on a small number of technology companies. Reports indicate that the vast majority of automated CSAM reports submitted to European authorities originate from a single US-based platform operator, raising questions about oversight and the role of private companies in policing online communications. Under the Parliament's mandate, scanning technologies should be applied only to previously identified and hashed CSAM or to material flagged by users, trusted organizations, or law enforcement. The use of traffic data analysis alongside message content scanning was also rejected. Negotiations with EU member states will now determine the final shape of legislation. Until then, the Parliament's vote signals that automated scanning of private communications in the EU should not be applied indiscriminately. So all I can say to that is hallelujah. Fantastic. This is indeed a massive, massive win. Of course, it just kicks the can down the road. This could always come back. We need to be vigilant. But at the last minute, this was a big save. So congratulations to the EU on making a much better decision. All right, real quick, two more things. First of all, this is from Cyber Insider, and it's about a new feature coming to Mozilla's Firefox. Mozilla announced that Firefox version 149, which is coming up very soon, I think, will introduce a free browser-integrated VPN tier starting March 21st, 2022. So yeah, that's this week. The feature is positioned as a safer alternative to the quote-unquote free VPN services that often come with hidden trade-offs, with Mozilla stressing that its implementation is rooted in the same privacy principles that define Firefox. According to the announcement, the built-in VPN will route browser traffic through a proxy, hiding a user's IP address and location during browsing sessions without requiring a separate download or extension. Mozilla said the free tier will initially provide 50 gigabytes of monthly data to users in the United States, France, Germany, and the United Kingdom. The feature is scheduled to arrive in Firefox 149 on March 24th. That limited regional rollout suggests Mozilla is taking a phased approach, likely to assess performance demand and support technical requirements before expanding availability. The company framed the launch as a direct response to the privacy concerns that often surround no-cost VPN offerings. Mozilla did not disclose the underlying technical provider or infrastructure details in this announcement, but it emphasized that the service is built around its long-standing data minimization stance. Mozilla has previously stated that Firefox is designed so that even the company itself should not know which websites users visit or what they do there. It has also repeatedly said it does not sell personal data and relies on end-to-end encryption for synced browsing data such as history and bookmarks before that information leaves the device. Firefox is one of the few major browsers not built on Google's Chromium engine. Instead, it relies on Mozilla's open-source Gecko engine. That independence has long been central to Mozilla's pitch, both as a privacy-focused browser vendor and as a steward of competing web standards. The VPN edition now gives Firefox another feature it can use to distinguish itself in a browser market increasingly shaped by AI tools, ad tech, and platform lock-in. All right, so yeah, sure, great. This is nice. It's nice to have it built in. Definitely a lot of free VPNs are not free. They monetize your data, which doesn't make them very private. Now, Proton is an obvious exception. They do have a free tier that is very usable. In fact, I would suggest you honestly use that over this, but it's nice to have this built in. I will say that it's not really a VPN in the true sense of a VPN. Yes, it does hide your real IP address from the sites that you visit, but it doesn't encrypt all your traffic. So, it's not going to protect you if you're on a shady, router at a mom and pop coffee shop or something. Now, given almost all your internet traffic today is based on HTTPS anyway, so most of your connections are still, the content is still encrypted by default, but it doesn't hide metadata, including things like maybe DNS lookup. So it still might be possible for your internet service provider, whoever that is, whether you're at home, your cell phone company, or your Starbucks or wherever you're at, to be able to see what sites you're visiting, even if they can't see what you're doing on those sites. Also, because it's built into Firefox, this is only applying to Firefox. So unlike a regular VPN, it doesn't apply to everything you're doing on your computer. So if any of your other apps on your computer are accessing the internet, it will not be hiding the IP address from whatever sites they're going to. But it is better than nothing. It's free. It is a nice perk. And it's better than most free VPN services, which are typically shady. I'm curious to know what third party you're using, but they have worked with Mulvet in the past, so that would be my guess, but apparently we don't know that. All right, one more quick one here. This is from Lifehacker. Security updates aren't as flashy or as fun as feature updates, but they're just as important, if not more, to install. They include patches for vulnerabilities in your device's operating system that could leave you open to hacking. By patching these weak points as quickly as possible, you reduce the risk to your device and its data. Traditionally, Apple has largely kept its security updates tied to its general software releases, both big and small. Rather than release iOS 26 and a subsequent security patch, Apple just couples the two. Even if you don't or can't update to the latest iOS, Apple will add the most important patches to new updates of older iOS versions. For example, 18.7.6 or 15.8.7. But the company has toyed with individual security releases in recent years, especially for particularly timely patches. They started with rapid security responses, and that's capitalized, that's an official term of art for Apple, which were updates that were specifically labeled as such, like iOS Security Response 16.4.1a. I thought this was a great idea, especially as other platforms like Android and Windows already do this for their users. Well, it seemed like a good idea. Apple hasn't released one of those in a while. Instead, the company has largely gone back to releasing security updates alongside typical software updates, whether or not it had any new features to include in said update. Now it seems the company is trying out a new type of security update, one that's rather hidden at that. Initially announced with iOS 26.1 and iPadOS 26.1 and macOS 26.1, Apple is now rolling out background security improvements. According to the company, these are lightweight security releases for things like Safari or WebKit, which is the framework that Safari is built on, and other system libraries. Like the rapid security responses, the idea is to issue smaller patches in between software updates. That way, Apple doesn't have to release 26.3.2 in order to patch Safari. You can stay on 26.3.1 and still update Safari with the proper patch. In fact, this feature just had its first update this week. On Tuesday, Apple pushed out version 26.3.1a for iOS, iPad, and macOS. This update patches a WebKit flaw that led to bad actors bypassing same origin policy if you clicked on malicious web content. Same origin policy typically prevents malicious sites from accessing other sites you might have open. For example, if you open a malicious site, same origin policy should stop it from accessing your Gmail inbox open in another tab. But this flaw gave bad actors a way around that. This update is available to all Apple devices running the latest versions of Apple's OSs, but you won't find it if you check your software update settings. That's not because it's still rolling out. Rather, you need to make sure background security improvements is enabled in order to open up these security updates. On your Apple device, open Settings, or System Settings on macOS, then go to Privacy and Security. Here, scroll down to the bottom of the page, then choose Background Security Improvements. Here, ensure that Automatically Install is turned on. If so, the update should install on its own, but there's no telling when it will do so. You can also install the update manually. Below this toggle, you'll see the latest Background Security Improvements update. Choose Install, enter your password or passcode, and your device will begin downloading the update. When it's ready, you can hit Restart and Install. So that's great. This has been a long time coming, I think. Android's done this for a while. And Apple sort of did this for a while, but as this article says, it didn't use it that often. So anyway, it's got a new way to do it, and this is all good stuff, so make sure that's turned on. I checked my devices, and it was already on by default, so not sure why, but you should definitely double check and make sure that's still there. Also, while we're talking about Apple devices, Apple released some fix for some old versions of iOS, iPadOS, and macOS. So even if you're not on the latest, and you should be if you can, but if you're not on the latest version of all of those, still make sure you're up to date because there were some fixes to older ones that was really bad bug. So make sure all your devices are as up to date as you can make them. Okay, so now it is time for my tip of the week. And I think it's timely given what I said at the top of the show. So I'm going to talk about one specific thing here for the tip of the week, and then I'm going to give you a bunch of rattle off some other kind of lightning round things. But right now we need to be even more safe and cautious than normal. And so being spring, I thought it would be a good time to do some spring cleaning. And as we like to say sometimes with security, subtraction makes you safer. So instead of adding on security products and security features and whatever, sometimes the best way to become more secure is to remove stuff. Over the years, our computers and smartphones have gained all sorts of apps and plugins through a steady accretion, like barnacles. And every app you install exposes you to more data collection and security vulnerabilities. So over time, these apps can get out of date. They could be unsupported and might not be getting security updates anymore. And even if they are getting up to date, a lot of times the updates that come with them are bad updates. Like they'll start collecting more data, for example, and might start asking permission for your access to your location, which they're going to turn around and monetize. So I'm encouraging everybody at this point to do some purging. And so that means going through your smartphone and your computers and finding all the applications that are installed. And that's actually gotten trickier. Like even on a smartphone, you can't just guarantee that there's an icon for every app you install now. Sometimes they're still hidden from you. So you need to find the list of everything that's there. And if you have not used that in, a few months, I would say it's a strong candidate for removal. And realize that you could always reinstall it again later. Most apps today have cloud-based data anyway. So as long as you download the app and log back in again, all of your data should still be there. Now, you might want to check that for sure for any particular app you're downloading. Make sure there's a cloud backup of your data. But find the apps that you really don't need and delete them. And here's another class of apps that really drives me nuts. Restaurants and chain stores and other stores and services are constantly forcing you or trying to force you to install their app. They sometimes make it sound like it's mandatory when often it's not, but they really want you to use their app. And you got to ask why? Why are they pushing so hard for that? Why do I have to install yet another app? Well, it's because apps allow them to do a lot more data collection. Because otherwise, if you're accessing it through the web, then you could be using a privacy-respecting browser like Brave or Firefox and ad blockers like uBlock Origin, and they don't like that. It prevents them from getting a lot more information about you. It prevents them from showing you ads. If you install their app, they have much more control over what they can force you to do and data that they can collect. So that's another whole class of apps. If you have an app that you could really just use the website instead, like you should avoid installing social media apps for your computer. Just go to the website and use a privacy protecting browser when you do. So go back and look at all the apps you have installed, things you haven't used in a long time, maybe stuff you installed as a free trial or just to try them out. Maybe some restaurant or store coerced you into installing an app for a sign-up deal or a free appetizer or whatever. Get rid of those. If it's anything you could just go to the web and access, get rid of the app. If you have something that solved one particular problem that you no longer need, ditch those. And for example, we used to install QR code scanners on our smartphones because it wasn't built into the phone. Well, they're all built into the phone now. Your camera app on Android or iOS, you just whip out your camera app and scan a QR code and that works. You don't need a special app for that anymore. And also PDF readers. That's something that we used to download Adobe Acrobat or some specialized application for. We don't need that anymore. Almost all browsers will open and read and even fill out PDFs. And if you're on a Mac, the Preview app will do that as well. You don't need those. And Adobe in particular, God, I hate their apps. They install so much extra crap you don't need. There's just a lot of those kind of apps you don't need anymore. So anyway, go back, reevaluate everything you've installed on both your computer and your smartphone. And if you don't need it, ditch it. And just realize that in most cases, you could just reinstall it later and get it back if you really need it. Now, I'm not going to go through all the process for that. It's in my article on Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons. There's a link in the show notes. It has links to things that will help you find and delete all the applications on your devices. But let me go a little bit further because I've mentioned this before as well. And we also need to evaluate all the add-ons or plugins or extensions that we've installed. Normally this is on your browser, but some applications have extensions and plugins as well. Those should be suspect. Like you should consider those to be applications in their own right. And each of one of those can be vulnerable to security problems or, extracting your data. So also look through all your plugins. And then finally, you can go even further, and I put links to other articles that I've written about finding and deleting all your old online accounts. That is also good because all that data is still sitting out there. If it hasn't been stolen or monetized yet, it probably will be. So if you don't need those old accounts, get them closed. Delete as much of your online data as you can, and just minimize. This is a Marie Kondo purging kind of a thing. But it's not just about joy. It's about literally, like, if you really don't need it, get rid of it. You are reducing your attack surface. And often that is much better and easier to do than to try to make keeping those things secure. All right, there you go, your news and your tip of the week. Okay, so before we go, I promised you I'd have some other tips for you. And these are all things that we've covered on and off over the years. But again, with all the political and economic turmoil right now, we really need to be more vigilant than normal. And now is a good time, if you've been putting these things off, to suck it up and just do as many of these things as you can. And realize that also in these situations, when there is this kind of upheaval, that it can lead to, first of all, obviously retaliatory cyber attacks, which is already starting to happen, but can also trigger opportunistic attacks. When people are worried about things, when there's a lot going on, it's really easy to freak people out and use these opportunities to strike from parties that are not even directly involved. So, all right, so I'm just going to do a quick lightning round of things that you should try to do if you can. First of all, keep all your software updated on a regular basis. That is crucial. In particular, obviously, your smartphones and your computers, but also your home router. If you haven't updated the software of that ever, you should look into trying to update that and get it to the latest version possible. Also, routers are very often targeted by bad guys. And one thing you could do, if nothing else, is just reboot it periodically, because a lot of times any malware that gets onto those devices will be flushed just by turning it off and turning it back on. Use a password manager and update all your old crappy passwords, the ones that you can remember. If you can remember them, they can be guessed. And you're probably also reusing them on multiple sites, which is also very bad. So I know it could be a little tricky to set up, but it's not as bad as you think. Pick a password manager like 1Password or Bitwarden. Don't use the ones that are built into your browser. Use a password manager. Find your old crappy passwords, especially on your important accounts, which is not just financial accounts, but also your email and social media accounts, because they can be used against you or against others. Make sure you've got crazy random 20-character passwords for each of those, and you don't have to remember them because that's the beauty of the password manager. Also, if you can, and I know this is painful and a lot of people don't do this, but two-factor authentication is a great belt and suspenders way to secure your accounts. Be extra vigilant these days against phishing attacks, including now with AI, right? They're going to get a lot better. Be super wary of anything that is urgent or scary. And if you're unsure about anything, if your boss is asking you through an email to do something he normally wouldn't do, or that sounds fishy, or some relative is claiming that they need you to wire them money or whatever, find some other way to verify directly with that person or a company or whatever that is really the case. Don't trust any phone numbers that are given to you or links that are given to you. Go out and find the official phone number or website or whatever and contact them directly, or find another communication mechanism if it's somebody you know to verify that they really did send you that and they really do want you to open that document or whatever. So on updating, if you're still on Windows 10, that is no longer supported and is no longer getting security updates. Yes, there are some weird things you could do to prolong that a little bit, but frankly, I know this is not fun, but if you're on Windows 10, you really should update to Windows 11 or take that device completely off the internet. All of your Apple devices should be on version 26 dot something. They've all synchronized their version numbers now, and it's all based on the calendar year. So you want to be on iOS or Mac OS or iPad OS or TV OS or Watch OS or whatever, version 26 point something. And if your device is so old that you can't get to that, you might want to start thinking about getting a new device. Also, think about all the IoT devices you have, if any of them are really maybe insecure or sketchy or really cheap from a kind of a weird brand name, particularly if those devices are old enough that they are no longer supported and no longer getting software updates, you should replace them or get rid of them. And then, as I said, delete any apps or plugins that you no longer absolutely need. Okay, one more thing. If you happen to own or work for a small to medium company, particularly if that company is related to critical infrastructure or resources of some variety, please sign up for CISA's free scanning service. It is a no-brainer. CISA will scan your network and look for vulnerabilities. It's called the Cyber Hygiene Service, and I put a link in the show notes. Also, CISA has got some great resources, including a list of known bad practices, like these are things you should not be doing. That's also worth reviewing. It's not very long, and will get you a lot of bang for the buck. So all those links are in the show notes. Okay, let's wrap up here. We're already running long. My top patrons this week will get their Merling's Musings patron-only bonus podcast. And this will be part 2 of my really big project to create my own private AI server. Kind of like OpenClaw, but the way I would do it. So patrons look forward to getting that on Thursday morning as usual. Okay, now I am heading to Washington, D.C. next week. I'm going to be there all week, which means that the news show that would normally follow that week is going to have to be recorded before I go. So there will be a news show. It will probably be abbreviated, and it will not cover the last week worth of stuff. It's kind of unavoidable. I don't know what else to do. I could shift my schedule up and do 2 interviews in a row. We'll see. I may still do that, but I really like trying to keep the schedule. So anyway, the next news show might be a little abbreviated. But I'm going to a really interesting privacy pseudo conference, and I'm going to meet some great people, hopefully line up some even better interviews for the future. It should be a great networking situation. I can't wait to see what I bring back from that. All right, lots of great interviews coming up. I've got, now at this point, I have 3 authors that I'm going to be interviewing in the next few months, all with new books coming out, all really interesting topics. So look forward to that. And next week, you're going to hear my kind of a panel discussion with Nate and Jonah from Privacy Guides. That was a lot of fun. So you'll be getting that next week. All right, let's wrap it up. Take care, everybody. Stay safe out there. And until next time, as always, don't get caught with your drawbridge down.